I'm sideways again. What's going on? It showed me right earlier. Let's see here. What can I change? It doesn't let me do it any way but this way. Oh, well. All right. Let's get started. This is Uber Theologian here. This is number 5 on the Uber Theologian list, and I'm out delivering food and delivering theology. So let's get started here. I want to talk about subjectivity and the existence of the soul. This is fascinating. I'm telling you, you're not gonna, it's just really exciting, fun to talk about. But subjectivity and the existence of the soul, we're talking about it in two manners. The existence of the soul is something that is a problem for physicalists, people who believe that all there is physicality. Whenever we talk about a soul is very difficult for them to explain or to admit its existence. In fact, I would say that if a soul exists, then physicality is wrong, because we are more than the physical components of what are made up in our body and our brain. And there's two real primary arguments that I want to talk about today. These aren't the only arguments. There are a lot of arguments, but I think these are a little bit unique, and maybe you've never heard of these before, never been exposed to them before. But the first one has to do, and again, we're talking about proof whether or not the soul exists. And the first one has to do with the subsistence of our subjectivity. Now, whenever I say subsistence of subjectivity, what I mean by that is this. I mean that there is an underlying you that always exists. Like, I did a funeral recently, and at the funeral, I was talking about how we can be assured that the person that has died has not really died, because there is a continuation of their self that is shown in their natural life. You see, here's the deal. And here's the problem for physicalists. They would call themselves you or me. They would say, this is me. And then 10 minutes later, they would still say, this is me. And then 5 years later, 5 years later, they would still say, this is me. It's always them. They are personally who they are, and they are responsible, and they're connected to whoever they were before. There is a subsistence of personhood, a subsistence of who they are. Even though every a few years, 7-10 years, every one of our cells, except for a few neurons, our neurons in our brain, not a few, there's a lot of them, but except for our neurons, some of them do undergo some change, but except for our neurons, every cell in our body changes. And so essentially you are different than who you are. This was illustrated in philosophy a long time ago with the philosophy of the ship. And it's this idea of a ship going from one place to another in the water. And as they're going, they keep on changing parts of it and putting new parts in. So they replace old parts, put new parts in. And the philosophical question was, when does it cease to be the ship it was before and become an entirely new ship? And it's kind of the same way when we're talking about ourselves. You could talk about a river the same way. Whenever a river goes by, can you step in the same river twice? Can you really call it the same river? But with us, with the soul, it's much different too, because we act and live, even people who do not believe in a soul act and live as if there is a soul, or as if there is a subsistence of existence. It's kind of like a book. If you take a book and you have all these chapters and all these pages, they are all individual pages, but they are bound together by the binding in one book. And in a way, the soul provides the binding to who we are. We are always the same person. If that is true, then we can hold people responsible for things they do. Because even the neurons in your brain do go through changes where the synapses strengthens and weakens and creates new ones, and the chemicals within the neurons change. So it's, in some sense, everything about you changes. You are not who you were 10 years ago. If you're over 10 years old, you are not who you were physically at all, who you were 10 years ago. So if somebody commits a crime, let's say it was in 2014, now if we say every 10 years or so, it's different for each kind of cell, but let's just say every 10 years, all the cells undergo change. can you hold them responsible for something that they did whenever they didn't do it, right? If you're an atheist, if you're someone who's a physicalist, they did not do it. You have to be able to explain how it is you are holding some physical person responsible for some other physical person's actions. And so that is the problem of subsistence. There's a gap of knowledge whenever it comes to that, unless you have the soul, unless you have a consciousness that is binding it all together to where you are the same person you were before. Very interesting argument. I encourage you to dig deeper into that one. It's really, really good. And then there's also, let me look here. What do I have next? Oh, the Qualia argument. The Qualia argument is really a great one too. The Qualia argument has to do with qualia. It's from a Latin word, just mean basically what is it? Kind of like manna. What is it? Doesn't relate so much to this, but the Qualia argument, or the problem of Qualia, has to do with how we experience things, our pure subjectivity in our experience. This one's a little bit difficult to grasp, so hang with me. It's really, really good. So whenever we're talking about, let's illustrate it with a classic illustration of Mary's room. I think it's Frank Jackson came up with this illustration of Mary's room to show how it's impossible for us to be only physical beings. We have to be beyond that. And one of the things is you can do this. The illustration of Mary's room was basically this. Imagine a neuroscientist named Mary, and she is in a room that is, she's very, very smart. She knows every possible thing there is to know, past, present, future, everything we will ever learn about our brain, how our brain works. So somebody comes in here and she learns about, at some point, somebody talks to her and tells her about the color red, because she's living in a black and a white room. So in this black and white room, she's never seen red, but she knows everything there is to know about how people process redness in the brain. So the whole idea is, what is the redness of red to you? And so whenever she experiences the color red, does she gain anything than what she knew before? Because she had every bit of information before, but now it seems that she's gained something more, because knowledge of something, the physical element of the brain chemistry and everything else, does not provide you with the subjective, emotional, whatever you feel whenever you see something. Now, my illustration is the greatest because I love Camaros. You've seen, I was a Camaro theologian. I did that video the other day of the Camaro that I saw, the 1967 Camaro. That was amazing. And I'm telling you, whenever I pulled up and saw that Camaro, I mean, it was just, my heart just leapt because it's so exciting. I mean, there are very few things that make me that excited. But whenever I see a Camaro like that, 1967, this one was silver, had black stripes on it, pristine condition. Whenever I saw that, I already knew about those Camaros. I mean, you can tell me everything there is to know about those Camaros, and I could even picture it in my brain in some sense. But whenever I see it, I have a different experience. How do you explain that experience? The Qualia argument basically says, how do you explain the difference that you have from the knowledge you had about something beforehand to the point when you experience something? And this plays over into everyday practical life so much. I mean, into relationships and how we view things and how we relate to other people, how we understand other people. We look at somebody that my wife looks at me, and whenever I send her the video of the Camaro, she's like, I don't see what you see about that. It's a different Qualia. It's a different experience. She has all the information, but she experiences it and feels something because of something else. And this is a good argument, a substantial argument for a knowledge gap for physicalists in this subsistence, or the Qualia argument. And I mean, people do the best argument that's really been come up with that I've heard. I mean, Daniel Dennett has a couple of arguments, but the best argument that they have is basically, we just don't know yet. Just because we don't know doesn't mean we won't know and be able to explain it someday. But That they accuse us all the time of the God of the gaps. That is a knowledge of the gaps theory. Just because we don't know something, you can't say science will explain it someday. Science can't even explain itself, much less many of these other things. So these are two really good arguments, the subsistence argument and the qualia argument, or the is sometimes called the Mary's room argument. Those arguments are really, really good, unique arguments whenever you're talking about the existence of the soul that really can't be explained outside of a worldview that does believe in an immaterial self, a binding to the book, something more. You are more than what you are, more than your body. You can go into tons of other arguments, I mean, including near-death experiences, which is one of the biggest ones today. But I love pulling out these older ones, these more, in some sense, more substantial, because you don't have to experience a near-death experience in order to understand this. And you experience it every day. You experience the same you as you were 10 years ago, and you experience the same interaction with items that is different than other people's interaction. And you know that seeing something, being engaged with it personally, is very, very different than just having a knowledge of it. So anyway, guys, I hope this has been good for you. This is the Uber Theologian, part of Credo House Ministries, part of everything else I do. If you want to support, please, please, please go to Patreon. That would be great. We're trying to build a new Credo House, which was a theological coffee house. You wouldn't believe it. You won't believe it. We're going to get it done. Thank you so much. I got to